Hello again, Taylor County. We're here with Doug Flohr, who's running for the Board of Education in the Eastern District. Doug, appreciate you joining the program.
Well, thanks for having me down. Thank you so much.
Doug, so as we were discussing earlier, you are unopposed in the district. I mean, there are multiple people running for Board of Education, but how that race goes, there are 2 districts open this term.
That's correct.
And you are unopposed, running where Dick Teagarden.
That is correct. I'm replacing Dick Teagarden, who did a great job for years and years and years on the Board of Education. In fact, he was my 6th grade teacher, so I've known him forever. And I think that everybody's probably sad that he's leaving, but I'm happy to be back, Tony.
Great. Well, then just to start out, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? And normally I say about your campaign. I'm sure you're not campaigning a whole lot, but just tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I grew up in Taylor County. I grew up in Grafton, and I graduated from Grafton High School in 1981. Went off to West Virginia University. I got a bachelor's in history from WVU, and I got a commission in the Army, and then I spent a little over 28 years in the military, in the Army, and then retired, and always wanted to come back here, and so that's what I did. And in that 28-year period, I picked up a master's in education from WVU, and then a master's in strategic studies from the United States Army War College. So my education never stopped. And so that's why I'm interested in running for Board of Education. Education's always been a priority with me, and I think it's the one thing that will really impact on the quality of life here in Taylor County.
Great. So what does, as we speak about the Board of Education, what role does it play? I mean, tell the folks exactly how is it that the Board of Education impacts our county?
Well, the Board of Education works very closely with the superintendent, but it is responsible for everything that impacts on children's education here in the county through the secondary school system. So from the time your child starts in the 1st grade, clear up until they graduate from high school, the Board of Education controls the budget and the hiring of teachers, and it works very closely with the superintendent, but it basically sets the criteria for success for education in the county.
Great. So if you're elected, which you will be, what do you see as your number one priority coming in, and ultimately how would you like the legacy of Doug Flohr, Taylor County Board of Education member, to play out?
Well, first of all, I'm very humbled to take the position. We've had my life was impacted on the educators here in Taylor County, and we've always had a group of educators who strive to prepare students to go to the outside world. And I can think back, and list half a dozen off the top of my head that impacted on my life throughout that system. We've hit a critical juncture, I think, here in the state. If you watch the legislature this year, and that's kind of what drove me to run for education, we're going to have a very significant financial challenge here in the state. So the state gives us about $11 million a year for the county. And then the county raised about another $9 million in taxes. So the budget for the county education system is about $20 million a year. The state's not going to be able to fund us that full $11 million. Now, that's just my best guess, based on the budget issues that we've got here in the state because of coal and the severance tax is just not coming in. Now's the time that we're going to require leadership, and we're going to have to figure out how we're going to not only sustain our education level in Taylor County, but we've got to improve it. And I don't think anybody's got the right answer for that. So it's got to be a collaborative effort among parents and teachers and staff administrators to figure out what we can do to improve our education here, not just sustain it. So the biggest obstacle I think we're going to face is going to be funding. It's going to be really tight. Now, this county just passed the school levy, which I think we desperately needed. So I was very happy to see that. Let's hope we don't have to pass more, but I think there's going to be a shortfall in state funding that we've never seen before. Keep our fingers crossed, and they're still working the budget down there.
Sounds challenging. Yeah. To that point, the next question was, what do you see as the biggest challenge?
Well, let me tell you about another challenge I think we've got. We've got, so there are really 5 schools here in the county. And when they do the rating on those at the state level, the school that has the greatest challenge is Anna Jarvis. And that's our primary elementary school. There are a little over 600 students at Anna Jarvis. I think West Taylor's got a little over, or just short of 300, and then there's 180 plus at Flemington. Now, both Flemington and West Taylor do fairly well. within the education system in their rankings in the state. Anna Jarvis is doing better, but we really have to focus on that school. They've got great educators over there. They've got great kids. We have to crack the code on what we can do to increase the productivity of that school. What do they need? And I think that's the primary role that I want to play in the school system. We have to work through the superintendent. We've empowered the superintendent to do her job, and it's not my job to step in and undercut her. But it's our goal and our job as school board members, as I see it, to interact routinely with the school system and the superintendent and provide them the tools that they need. Quite frankly, we need to make sure that we've got the right metrics that are showing us where we've been and where we're going, and we can reinforce success where we can.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Especially with resources.
Yeah, and specifically speaking, Amanda Jarvis, I mean, it's not like that's not possible. At one time, that school was highly regarded across the state.
That's correct.
Cool. Yeah, so good point. I agree. Some of the things we did actually before this interview, we polled the citizens of Taylor County to bring us questions about various candidates' offices, really, and there were a lot for Board of Education. Part of that, again, thanks for the help with Rich Zukowski and his civics class. Part of those questions, I think, are coming from these guys. You can see with school lunches and things like that. But some of them, one of the things, the hottest topic was a lot of questioning around the levy, and you mentioned that. And yeah, again, congrats that we've got that money aside, and again, we're able to pass it. The question was, why have and this, of course, you weren't a board member at this time, but
right.
Why have the levy at a special election, which has special costs associated with it, as opposed to having it maybe at the time of this primary or over a general election? Do you have it?
I think a better idea is that by doing that, you're solely focusing on the levy itself. You're not worrying about other board members, and the board members, although it would be nice to hear what the board members think about the levy, and I think I've told you that I'm always in favor of a levy, because I don't think there's anything else that impacts on the quality of life here in the county like education. It's an opportunity for our children that we need to reinforce. At the same time, I like the fact that when they hold it on an off year, we can focus on the levy, and the board is not in turmoil. They're not worried about running for election or anything. And if they support the levy, then they're out there in the community talking about it. And I don't think we ought to ever raise a levy just because it's something nice to have. I think we have to pay particular attention to where we're spending our money. We owe it to taxpayers to make sure that we're spending their money and we're getting the biggest bang for the buck. But with the state and the financial crisis that it is, I think we're going to have to step up our game. The board and the educators are going to have to do as good a job as they can in that school system, and then the local citizens. Even if you don't have kids in school anymore, you're going to have to step up, and you may have to pay more taxes. Let's hope that's not the case, because I'm just like everybody else. I don't want to see an increase in property taxes. But I also know that we can't afford to allow our school systems to slip. We do pretty well here in Taylor County. We could do a lot better. The state in general could do a lot better. It's just the nature of the beast here.
Sure. So one of the other themes that kept coming up was spirituality in education. Where do you feel that role sits? Is there a role for spirituality in our public education system?
I think there probably is. I spent, like you, I deployed. I spent a number of years overseas in the Middle East. So I have firsthand experience of the one extreme where religion is the school system. I can tell you I'm not interested in that at all. I think that everybody should have the right to say a prayer in quiet if they want to. I don't really see it as part of the curriculum. If there was an official religious studies class, then sure, then that's great. But I like to keep my church and my state separate, quite frankly.
Gotcha. One of the topics that's been hot around here for a while is dropout rates and things, and we've seen improvements in there. But when you look at that, some of the reasons behind it are drugs or mental health, disruptive students. Where do you see the role of the board in solving those? And do you have ideas already of how to maybe help improve those statistics?
I would like to really see the metrics that we've got especially at the high school level, but it starts long before that. It starts at the elementary school and goes all the way up. We apparently have a very good graduation rate right now. I don't know how they calculate that graduation rate, but that's one of the things I'm going to be interested in. I can tell you the graduation rate when I graduated from high school, regardless of what it officially was about 50%. That's pretty abysmal. We started a class with, I think, around 240 students. The high school's always and still averages about 600 kids a year, students a year, and I think my graduating class was 120. So we lost some kids to car accidents. We had some kids move, but that couldn't be more than 20, 30 kids. So where did the rest of those folks go? But I think they do a much better job now of focusing on getting the kids to the school. Now, there's a trade-off to that. One of the things I did in the military is I've got a background in curriculum development and secondary education from my degree. The strangest thing was I ended up using that in the Army. I ran the United States Army Ranger School for 2 years. I was the commander. And we put a lot of emphasis on curriculum development, and we actually used a lot of stuff from WVU so we could allow our instructors, and they were teachers, but they were instructors, to set the pace of the instruction based on where our Ranger students were for that given period of time. And so we paid a lot of attention to metrics. And the historical graduation rate in Ranger School is about 50%. It's 50% because it's tough and the standards are high. So I think that when you start looking at graduation rates, I think you need to find the balance. Or is the quality there? I think the best and the perfect situation is where you got very high standards and you have a high graduation rate. I think that's what we want to shoot for. But I can't comment on the way they're doing it now because I just haven't seen it.
Sure, yeah, makes sense. One of the topics you already brought up is funding, and several folks were concerned around what the balance and the emphasis in your mind on not yours particularly, but in the role of board members of your minds of where the funding should go. Because when you start looking at cutting funding, and really primarily around sports spending versus arts and sciences.
Yeah.
And that's been a kind of divide for years. How do you have an opinion on how that's played out or how it should be played out?
Right off the top of my head, I would tell you that I don't want to see any cuts. Period.
Sure, of course.
Now, how do you do that? Well, I think you're going to have that's going to be a tough thing to do. I don't want to see the arts cut. I don't want to see sports cut, but we can't afford to cut academics, especially that we get measured by math and reading. That's the primary tool, the metric that the state uses to determine where our schools are. And so we have to reinforce that. And I think what we can do is we need to tap into what the teachers think. And I'm sure they're already doing that. I'm not sure that we're doing it as well as we might be able to. And it goes back to that team effort where you've got parents involved, you've got teachers involved, you've got administrators involved, and you have to make the right decisions. I really don't want to see it cut because I think Taylor County struggles a little bit academically. And you can just look at the stats. We've only got one school that's rated success out of the 5 categories. We have one that's transition. We have 2 that are focus. We have none in the support category. And then we have Anna Jarvis is in the priority effort, which means it gets a lot of attention. And that's why I think we need to focus on the elementary schools. But we could do better than what we've been doing, and this funding is going to be a real issue. I think the citizens of Taylor County are going to have to make up their minds where they want to put their money. And as administrators, we should be responsible to make sure that they're getting the most for their money.
One of the things that's hot, I think a lot of people have an opinion on it that may have no knowledge on it, but there is a lot of opinions out there that are high test about this Common Core, whether it's Common Core or math. Where do you stand on Common Core? Do you have an opinion on it?
I love the idea of it. I like the fact that you've got, and I've talked to several teachers about this. I like the idea that you have a set standard that everybody's got to meet. The problem is, from what I understand from talking to teachers, they have more experience with than I do, is the implementation of that Common Core. And there's a large amount of frustration. So now I think I'm almost afraid that we're throwing the good out with the bad. And I think the state's going to have to come up with an idea. And we saw that in the legislature this year, where they're trying to come to grips with it. And in fact, we had a member of the State Board of Education resign and walk away just over frustration of it. So it's one of those things that the board is going to have to really discuss. We need a standard one way or the other, whether it's a state level standard or whether it's a federal standard. Now, I will tell you that my older children, and our last child's graduating from high school this year. He's graduating from Grafton High. Our older children, we moved every 2 years in the military, so they went to multiple high schools, most of them in the South. Most states in the South have a high school graduation test. It's not a very difficult test, but still it sets a minimum standard for graduation. And it's interesting to watch how the high schools handle that. I can remember Columbus, Georgia, there were 10 high schools. I think the average pass rate on that test was about 70%. There was a magnet school that had a pass rate of 100%. I would be in favor of the state having a state graduation requirements test. Now, when I was in high school, certainly I didn't want to see that. But now, that's not my problem anymore.
Yep, right. Well, you know better.
But it would. I think that would help raise the level.
Sure.
But that's a state level initiative. That's not something that we're going to be able to do here at the county. But we certainly can talk to our representatives, and that might be a good bill.
And speaking of more things in your control, but still are being brought up, and I think that's a good point. I think a lot of folks aren't sure about what can really be done locally, but there's a lot of control that comes from the state that we just have to just do. And one of those things, student lunches. That's one of the things that's brought up. I mean, I don't know what you can do about it. How much control do we have locally for student lunches, and or the nutrition guidelines just so strict that they are what they are?
Well, I noticed that a lot of our lunches, I think, talking to my son, I can tell you my son does not like lunches, but then he tends to be, he likes his mama's cooking, and that's kind of about it. But, when I was going to high school, the food over there was prepared fresh. I think a lot of the food now comes in what we would call military tea rations.
Sure.
And they heat those up, and I don't think the kids are really crazy about them. I think the nutritional values there, they're just not as palatable as something that's made out of lard. I think that probably is the issue. That's one of the things I want to do as a board member. I want to spend time with the custodial staff, with the cooks. I'd like to see what the lunch quality is. A lot of kids, it wouldn't matter what you fed them; they wouldn't
Sure.
care for it. But I think that's a responsibility the board they ought to take a hard look at what these kids are eating. Now, the other thing that the school system's doing that we don't talk a lot about in the county, and Jarvis has just started, but it's been ongoing in Flemington for a long time, is the backpack program. So we get a lot of complaints about the lunches, but the reality of it is that's the only hot meal that some of these kids are getting. And those backpack programs that the schools are running and a lot of the local churches are supporting are giving those kids food to eat over the weekend as a healthy alternative, because the reality of it is that meal that they're getting there at lunch in the school is the only nutritious meal they've got. We need to make sure that's a good meal. I'm not saying it's not a good meal now, but we ought to make sure that it's the best meal we can provide students.
Sure. Yeah, the statistics around how much of that is there is a little bit alarming. To that point, you talk about involving the cooks and other folks. How much student involvement do you feel as a board member to be able to shape policies and understand what's going on? How involved do you think as a board member you'll be with the actual students?
Well, there's some very specific bylaws that kind of talk. I take an individual board member. Really, my understanding of the bylaws right now, the individual board members don't have any power at all. We act as a board. So if there's an issue that a student brings up to me, that I'm required to share that with the entire board. Same with emails, electronic correspondence. The same with if a staff member comes up to me and she shares an issue. Because you've had a military experience, I'm also going to share that immediately with the principal and the superintendent. Because if you're keeping that stuff quiet, it's not going to have an impact. But I think a lot of good ideas come from high school students and from students in general. I mean, certainly I learned early on as an officer that if I wanted a high success rate, that I involved my squad leaders. A lot of good ideas come from those lower ranks, and it's the same thing in the school system. Those kids are in that school every day. and a lot of them have some very bright ideas, and they kind of think outside the paradigm. You know, as adults, we kind of see things one way, and they see them another way, and quite frankly, a good bit of the time, they probably have a better slant on it than we did.
Good point. Doug, I appreciate you being on the program.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We always give everybody the last word. What is it you'd like to tell the people of Taylor County?
Well, it's an honor to serve on the school board. I'm really looking forward to it. And the next 4 years, I hope that we make our mark and that we do as good a job as you hope that we'll do. So thank you.
Great. Doug, thanks again.
Thank you.